Live on all platforms. This is Sean Emslie from Letter to Philippi and the Letter to Philippi live broadcast initiative of Letter to Philippi, a new Messianic Jewish theological and biblical studies organization that seeks to build a Messianic Jewish theology for the future. And our first initiative of our new work of building a 21st century Messianic Judaism is this study of the book of Philippians, Paul's letter to Philippi. And this study is based on my 2019 commentary, Messianic commentary on Philippians, which is available from Letterer Press. And you can also purchase it on our website at lettertophilippi.org in our resource section. It's also available from Amazon.com. You can order directly there. Just search for Letter to Philip. For my name, Sean Emslie. So again, this is our concluding class of this week, as we are just about completed 6 weeks of this class, and coming to you live every day. There's a few days I missed, but for the most part, we've been doing at least 4 days a week, many of them 5 days a week, in this study. So we're continuing our study in Paul's letter to Philippi, looking now at chapter 4, the final chapter of the book, verses 7 through 9. And Paul is teaching here about the call to stand firm in their faith. As Paul has been talking about the new life of these Gentile followers of Yeshua in Philippi, to understand their new lives as following the God of Israel and living their lives as redeemed Gentiles. He now, as he's concluded this letter, comes back with a word calling them to stand firm in their faith, stand firm in following the God of Israel, stand firm against all of the distractions of Philippi, the false pagan religions of their past, and the other pagan religions that are looking to draw them either away from their Yeshua faith completely, or to have a melding, a syncretism of their Yeshua faith with the pagan rituals of the land of the city of Philippi. So Paul comes here, we read in verse 7 and 8, "Then God's shalom, passing all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds safe in union with the Messiah Yeshua. In conclusion, brothers, focus your thoughts on what is true, noble, righteous, pure, lovable, or admirable, on some virtue, or on something praiseworthy." So as Paul is concluding this letter to them, he wants them to focus their minds on good things, on pure things, on admirable things, on noble things, so as to set their mind counter to the culture of Philippi, which is bound up in false religions, on ignoble activities, various religions that involve sacrifice to false gods, various sexual rites to the gods. He's calling them to be counter to their culture, counter to the way of life in Philippi, by having a completely different mindset than the rest of the people in Philippi. The people in Philippi were focused on pursuing their false gods, on pursuing false religious activities, pursuing unvirtuous lives that were focused on the idolatrous and perverse worship of the Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Thracian gods. So to be counter to that, and to be sure that there's no distraction from their Yeshua faith, Paul calls them to have a completely different mindset than the people of Philippi, a completely different mindset for which they were reared in. And again, reading that verse 8, he says, "In conclusion, brothers, focus your thoughts on what is true, noble, righteous, pure, lovable, and admirable, on some virtue or on something praiseworthy." These are two more familiar verses. Chapter 4, as I said, is full of many familiar verses to people who have studied the scriptures, who have been in Bible studies before, who have read through the book of Philippi. These words here of focusing your mind on things that are pure is a verse familiar to many who have read through this chapter and are familiar with Paul's writings, because this is one of the more quoted verses from Paul's works. Paul encourages Philippians to focus their thoughts on positive things as a way of living in a world that focuses on negative things and lacks truth, nobility, righteousness, and purity. So Paul here, speaking to this community in Philippi, is that mostly redeemed Gentiles, now following the God of Israel, now living their lives in connection with the Messiah of Israel. He's calling them to have a completely different mindset than the people of Philippi, so as to keep them on the clear path of following Yeshua and following the God of Israel, and to not be distracted by the world around them in whatever the false religions of the people of Philippi that could be drawing them away from their Yeshua faith, calling them back to the religion of their past, and causing them to even have a syncretism, having a melding of their Yeshua faith and some of the pagan practices of Philippi, so as to ensure that they stay on the path of the God of Israel, the path of following the Messiah. Paul calls them to have a completely different mindset than the people of Philippi, a completely different mindset to those who were there, who were not focusing on righteousness. That they were false. Rather than truth, they were following false gods. Rather than nobility, they were involved in scandalous sexual cults and other things. Rather than righteousness, the people in these religions pursued unrighteousness. Especially the as we see with the worship of Sibyl, we talked to other, that these people who were following these men who were coming to be priests of Sibyl would actually mutilate themselves, would actually castrate themselves as an act of worship to the god Sibyl, which is completely unrighteous, completely ignoble, and completely impure. So Paul calls the people of Philippi, and that's by example, to live counter to the world that we live in, counter to the system of the world that is opposed to the God of Israel, by keeping our mind focused on things that are noble and pure. Let me read that list again. Inclusion: focus your thoughts on what is true, noble, righteous, pure, lovable, or admirable, on some virtue or on something praiseworthy. As God called the Jewish people to be holy, which we read about in Leviticus 20:26, that I am holy, you shall be holy also, and model the holiness of God, Paul offers the Philippians a practical way of holy living by focusing their minds on virtuous and pure things, so they can live outwardly with hearts turned inward to that which is pure. So as the Jewish people were called to be holy by God, that God said, I am holy, you shall be holy too. Paul here is calling these Philippian believers, these redeemed Gentiles, these Gentiles who have come to believe in the Messiah of Israel and have brought their lives into the worship of the God of Israel, the one God of Israel. He's calling them, like the people of Israel, to a holy living and holy life, and to do that by focusing their minds on holy things. That by keeping a completely different mindset from the world around them, from the pursuit of false religion, the pursuit of pagan sexual rituals, they were to be separate. And to be separate from the world around them, Paul calls them to have a completely different mindset, a mindset focused on pure things rather than on the pursuit of personal pleasure, on the pursuit of the false gods, but to focus their mind on the pure God, the one God of Israel, by focusing on pure things. That as they have a completely different mindset than the rest of the world, a mindset focused on godly things, focused on pure, holy things, on things that are true rather than things that are false, they can stand against the deception and the drawback to their pagan lifestyles of their past, or to new pagan practices that could be tempting to them, with a separate mindset from those who are not followers of Yeshua. Paul calls them to stand as ones different and ones who lived a life based on things that are true and pure and noble. Continuing on in verse 9, we read, "Keep doing what you have learned and received from me, what you have heard and seen me doing, and the God who gives shalom will be with you." Paul encourages the Philippians to follow his example as a follower of Yeshua. Paul, as the founder of the Messianic community of Philippi and the apostle to the Gentiles, now here is speaking to them in his place of authority as the founder of the community and the apostle of the Gentiles, saying that they are to follow his example as he follows the Messiah. This is continuing practices as he is a follower of Yeshua, the great example of living for the God of Israel, following the example of humility and self-sacrifice. Paul models himself after the Messiah, and he calls the Philippians to continue the modeling by modeling his life, modeling his focus on living more and more and more in the Messiah. Understand that life going forward is a life of one crucified with the Messiah. As we saw when we spoke about Galatians 2:20, that Paul said, "I am crucified with the Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives within me." That Paul understood that from his encounter with Yeshua there on the Damascus road, in his coming to know the Messiah, that his life ended there and his new life in the Messiah began there. That he was no longer he who lived, but he lived through the Messiah. That he was crucified with the Messiah. That his past life was transformed and became new life in the Messiah. That he became a Talmudim of Yeshua. He became a new person, one who had been redeemed by the sacrifice of the Messiah. Paul models the Messiah in his life and is conformed to the service of the crucified Yeshua. Paul's whole life, from his encounter with Yeshua on the road to Damascus, was a continuing desire to become more and more like the Messiah. He had been so transformed that all he could think about, all he could do from that time on the road to Damascus until that blade came down from the executioner under Nero, was to live more and more for the Messiah. And he calls the Philippians to model him, to model his calling and understanding that life from encountering Yeshua till our final breath is to become more and more and more in the Messiah. And as he models the Messiah, he calls the Philippians, and us by examples we read this, to focus our lives to be more and more and more in the Messiah, and to follow the example that Paul has given us. As he models the Messiah, we are to model Paul's humility and self-sacrifice and willingness to give his all, Paul giving his own life for the Messiah. We're called to follow in his example. Paul taught the Philippians by both his words and his words in the letter, and also in the life that he led before them as a slave of Messiah Yeshua, what it means to be a true Talmudim of Messiah, a true follower of the Master. He urges the people in Philippi to be encouraged and challenged by his example. As they see his example, he wants them to be encouraged, one, because it can be done, that one can devote their lives completely to Yeshua and completely given over to the Master as he had done it. They can also too focus their mind on pure things, focus their minds on serving the Messiah, and with Paul's example, they can do that. And he also wants them to be challenged for those who are not living that example of Paul, not living in the example of being a daily seeking to become more and more like the Messiah. So he encourages them, one, that it can be done, that one can totally devote their lives to the Messiah Yeshua and live totally for him and for the work of the kingdom of God to come in our world. And also for those who are yet to get on the journey of becoming more and more and more like the Messiah, he challenges them by his example, that as you see me, follow my example. As Paul modeled the Messiah, they too, the people of Philippi, should conform their lives to the Messiah. That daily he is calling the Philippians to like him, to be totally devoted to serving the Messiah and to being more like him each day. The reward for this lifestyle is shalom, peace in a fallen world where war and strife and death are ever present. He calls them to understand that in being totally devoted to the Messiah, totally seeking to be more and more in Messiah, that there is a shalom, a peace that is available to those who are followers of the Messiah, for those who are seeking to follow the Messiah and to model the Messiah, even in our fallen world full of war and strife and death, that even in this world, there can be peace because of our connection to the God of Israel, our intensely following the Messiah of Israel, and seeking to be more like him each day. Such peace comes by modeling Messiah and living distinctly in a world that calls for conformity. Paul here in these verses are calling the people of Philippi, and us by example, to live counter to our culture, counter to the pagan world that we live in, for the world that is caught up in all kinds of falseness and sin and distractions and things that are not holy, and things that are counter to the teachings of the God of Israel, counter to God's Torah, counter to the example of the Messiah. And Paul here is calling the people of Philippi and us by example, that though we live in a fallen world, that we live in a world that is overrun with paganism, overrun with false teachings and licentious lifestyles and pursuing one's own, pursuing one's own pride, pursuing for own sake, rather than living lives of holiness, lives of righteousness, lives of humility and self-sacrifice. We stand in a world that is beset with falseness and pride and the pursuit of oneself, rather than pursuing being more like the Messiah. So he calls the people of Philippi, and as by example, to understand that to live like the Messiah in a fallen world, in a world that is hostile to the God of Israel and hostile to living holy. He says, first off, you need to understand, you need to focus your thoughts on what is true, noble, righteous, pure, lovable, or admirable, on some virtue or on something praiseworthy. By focusing our minds, focusing our what we put into our minds, what we focus on, what we seek to do, what we honor in life. Do we honor things that are true? Do we honor things that are noble? Do we honor righteousness? Do we honor things that are pure? Do we honor things that are lovable? Do we honor things that are admirable? Do we honor virtues, or do we honor things that are praiseworthy? In doing this, in having this completely opposite mindset to a world that is caught up in falseness and unrighteousness and negativity and things that are not praiseworthy, but things that are unworthy and even despicable. Paul calls for us here to live as Messiah, to follow the Messiah's example by having a completely different mindset from the world around us, that we will live counterculture to the world around us by having a different mindset that's focused on truth, purity, and righteousness, rather than the falseness, unrighteousness, and impurity that is so prevalent in our world today and was prevalent in the world of Philippi too. So in this, we see Paul calling the people of Philippi to stand firm in their faith, and to stand firm in their faith by having a different mindset than the world around them, a mindset focused on godly things, focused on things that lead to becoming more and more and more in the Messiah. So that will conclude our teaching for today, and we'll continue on Monday with Paul sharing about his love and thankfulness for the Philippians. As he concludes his letter, he shares more about his deep love for the people of Philippi based on their love for him, their working together, and their personal and financial support for him in his work of bringing the good news of the Messiah to the world. So we will conclude with a word of prayer, and thank you for being with us today. Oh Lord, you are good. We thank you. We bless your holy name. We thank you for each day we get to look into your holy word. We thank you for your righteous servant, Paul. Help us, Lord, as he modeled the Messiah, may we also model his example, and become more and more and more in the Messiah each day. We thank you for your love. We thank you for a Messiah who makes us righteous and holy in an unholy world, and in whose name we pray. Amen. So thank you for watching the Letter to Philippi live broadcast. Again, my name is Sean Emslie. I've been the teacher for this time, and I'm the founder of Letter to Philippi, a new Messianic Jewish theological organization. And this daily broadcast, Letter to Philippi Live, is the first initiative of our new work. And as we will go into getting a Messianic Jewish perspective on Paul's letter to Philippi and looking at the various Messianic Jewish theological principles that can be drawn from this book, this what a dear friend called this tiny little book, but a powerful book that is full of powerful teachings about the Messiah Yeshua and about Messianic Jewish theological understanding, especially the second chapter where we see the earliest Messianic Jewish praise song, which includes the early recognition by the followers of Yeshua of his divine nature, that he was the divine Son who came into the world, and which in academic circles are called high Christology, a high understanding of the divine nature of Yeshua, that he was the one God of Israel who came into our world humbly and gave his life on the Roman cross. But he will also be the one who will reign over all of the created order one day. So thank you for watching. Again, this is an initiative of Letter to Philippi. You can go to our website, lettertophilippi.org. And if you have any questions, you can fill out our contact form. If you would like to watch or listen to any of our previous broadcasts, they are up there on our teaching section. You can purchase a copy of my Messianic commentary on Philippians through the resources page. You can leave a prayer request, as we talked about the importance of bringing everything to God in prayer yesterday. I would like to be praying for you people who are watching the broadcast. We'd really appreciate if you could make a financial contribution to our work. You can go to our giving page. We are a nonprofit organization, and we'd like to continue this work, and that would include your financial support. And if you want to find out about any of our other initiatives that we're working on, you can just go to lettertophilippi.org. And again, this broadcast is Monday through Friday from 12 p.m. Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, 10 p.m. Jerusalem time. So it's already Shabbat in Jerusalem. So they're more likely Shabbating right now. So for those who are yet to enter Shabbat, I will give you a Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you on Monday. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you on Monday as we look at Paul speaking about his love and thankfulness for the Philippians. Again, this is Sean Emslie from Letter to Philippi, lettertophilippi.org, and we'll see you on Monday. Thank you for watching.